Hi, everybody. We're going to reconvene. Hope you were able to get a quick bite to eat. And if folks can take their seats, we're going to get underway. So this, this whole morning has been a fascinating morning, I think, in terms of our public policy picture around open data, around some of the vehicles for collecting that, how we think about it. But obviously, there was this sort of seismic event that took place a week ago Tuesday. Living in Washington, D.C., I can say that I think all of Washington was taken by surprise. And I would imagine that would be true across the country, in large part just looking at the data and the polls that everybody was looking at. It just came as a bit of a surprise, frankly. But once you get past that, then you have to figure out, well, what happened? What did it mean? And where do we go from here? So we wanted to do a panel to finish out our event today and to really dig into that with some really great experts. First of all, I just want to say, congratulations to you guys for being able to turn things around so quickly and already have been to how many states to present this in the audiences? So it's pretty impressive. And we're very honored to have both Tim Storey and Jason Boxt. Jason is with PSB Research, and we have had the pleasure of hearing from him in the past at our DC fly-in, talking about some of the prognostications around the primary season.
Where I got it wrong.
Yeah, I wasn't going to do that to you.
No, it's fine.
So, yeah, and then Tim Storey from the National Conference of State Legislatures, NCSL. You were joining us a couple years ago after the midterm, and so really delighted to have you both back. What we're going to do is I'm going to hand this off to Jason and Tim. And I'm just hoping that I don't have to actually ask a single question, that once they go through their presentations, frankly, I would imagine that there are a million questions that you all have. And that microphone is the place to put it. But keep thinking about what those questions are. And I think what we're going to do, we're going to start with Jason to start at the federal level, and then we'll work down to the state. Mm-hmm. So, okay, so Jason, take it away.
Thank you.
Yeah?
I can't sit and talk.
Yeah, I'll slide back a little bit.
Will you clock me on 15 minutes? Because otherwise I'll just go on and on and on.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Jason Boxt. I work at a research firm, as she noted, called PSB. Indulge me for 30 seconds, because otherwise my bosses wouldn't let me come. So. We are a data-driven consultancy, and I think it's really important for the context here that we don't do the kind of public presidential polling that you guys probably were addicted to like crack cocaine for the last 18 months. What we do is equally addictive, but it is not the stuff that you guys were reading in the newspaper every day, and I think it's an important distinction. That was a pretty specific science, and we could have a conversation about whether or not the science failed. I'm not totally interested in having to defend my industry, but I'm sure somebody will ask that question, so you can ask. So here are just my very top of mind thoughts, and I say this with full disclosure, two full pieces of full disclosure. One, I consider myself part of the Democratic political class, and two, I was dead wrong. So, and when I mean dead wrong, I mean like sitting on the floor of the Scottish Parliament 12 months ago assuring people there that, no, don't worry, it's all going to be okay. Point number one, this was when we first went into the election, these things that happen with context, they don't happen in a vacuum. So when we first went into this election cycle, we saw right direction, wrong track numbers that were just horrifying. And if you don't pay attention to these things, it's largely an economic question. Is the country going in the right direction, or is it headed on the wrong track? And we saw numbers that were clocking up to 70% wrong track. So for those of us who think about these things, we thought, okay, well, this is going to be a change election. But then on the other side of the coin, we saw the economic numbers beginning to tick upwards, and we saw the president's job approval begin to tick upwards. And if you just looked at those numbers, then you were thinking to yourself, well, this is probably going to be a status quo election. So which was it? The answer is yes. It was both. For a lot of people, this was a change election. and they came out and voted. And for a lot of people, it was a status quo election, and they did not come out to vote, which is the second point. There were some pretty bold assumptions made, both in a polling sense, but actually, and more importantly, in a political context. There was an assumption that the Grand Obama coalition, blacks, Latinos, and young people, that came out in 2008 and was somehow resuscitated in 2012 was going to come out and vote, whether it was for Hillary Clinton or against Donald Trump, that they were also going to come out in 2016. That was where all of our heads were, and I suspect most of your heads were as well, and that just didn't come together. If you think back to 2012, there was I don't assume anybody actually thinks about these things because, well, I guess we're all kind of nerds. So there was a long conversation about why did the Romney pollsters have it wrong, and what we found was that they were consistently 2 to 3 points more likely to say that Romney was going to win. They had Romney at +1 on election day, and we couldn't figure out why their data was wrong. And the reality was their polling was fine, generally speaking, but they made this assumption that there was no way that the coalition of low incidence voters who came out in 2008, there was no way that President Obama was going to generate that kind of enthusiasm in 2012, and they were wrong. Point number 4, I think a lot of us, particularly self-proclaimed feminists, thought that we were entering the golden age of women. And we had Angela Merkel, we have Theresa May, we have Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland. This is women rise. Women did not rise at all. I think there was an assumption that Hillary Clinton was going to, this glass ceiling shattering moment, but in reality, women didn't come out to vote. And I think the final piece, which kind of ladders back up to all of those, was that there was really no emotional message, no emotional connection between Hillary and a broader subset of voters. And I'll talk about that just a little bit, because she did connect with a lot of voters, but there wasn't the emotional connection, the passion that we saw on the Trump side of the conversation. So they always talk about all the key elections that shape issues that shape an election, and I think this election started with build a wall, right? And somewhere in the middle there was lock her up, and then I think we ended with make America great again. But in reality, this election was about the economy. James Carville said back in 1992, "Is the economy stupid?" It's still the economy stupid. It is still, and most national elections are actually about the economy, one way or the other. So this is what we all saw going into election day. And so I'm going to tell you the story of why we were lulled into thinking that everything was going to be okay. Even though the data clearly show that in the final week of the campaign, things were getting really, really tight. I feel like the SWAT helicopters are coming to get me. I'm sorry, Mr. Trump, I'm sorry. It's a drone, excellent. But the data were very clear here that the election was getting closer, and it was getting really close, and we ignored data at our own peril. The data was telling a story. This is what the election map looked like the day before the election. And I want you to remember this map because I'm going to come back to it in a few minutes. But again, another reason why people were feeling comfortable. Oh, you can do that. That's awesome. So you look at all these states. So basically, dark colors are deep for the candidate. Lighter shades are leaning toward the candidate. So you can see like California and the West Coast. Well, that's shocking. Liberal Northeast, that's shocking. And then, Trump has all those, we call them the flyover states, which in hindsight is yet another example of our liberal elitism coming out. We say we have to fly over those states to get from one cool place to another. It's terrible, but I mean, that's kind of how we think. But you can see there are a lot of light shaded states, but they are almost all leaning toward Clinton. And this was all what fed into our preconceived notion of what the narrative was. So this is where we begin to see that there was some actual evidence that something was wrong, and none of us decided to pay attention. So this is white voters. The left side is educated. The right side is less than college. And you can see back in '92 there was really parity between the two parties. It didn't matter whether you were a Democrat or Republican. You were going to get roughly the equal amount of the white vote. And we saw this really interesting thing, and this was one of the narratives in the campaign, was that Hillary Clinton was, oh my God, she might win like educated white voters, and that would be unprecedented, and that would just further evidence that her message is connecting. Look at that right side. That is a nightmare. That is the peeling away of the working class, poor, white vote from the Democratic establishment. And it was there, we saw it for weeks, months, years. We knew this was happening, and none of us really paid attention. You see that number down there? I think it says R27. Ha! We'd have President-elect Clinton if it were R27. I'll get to that. This is what we were telling ourselves, that we were assuaging ourselves, that this is further evidence. Now, everyone talks about, and this is just demographically true, that Latinos are the fastest growing part of the American electorate. We will be a majority-minority country by 2050. And it was on the strength of the Latino vote, in large part, that Hillary Clinton was going to ride to victory. And you can see that this incredible meteoric rise of the percentage of Latinos as a part of the American electorate. So this was a good story for Hillary Clinton, and it's not surprising that she really tried to amp up this base. So, Tuesday, I found out it's still kind of weird coming out of my mouth. I found out that Donald Trump won as I was awoken by a pilot announcing over the PA system as I was landing in London that we had just elected Donald Trump the 45th President of the United States. That's the worst alarm clock setting ever. But I was immediately forced to deal with this and to understand it, so I've already been through all 7 stages of grief. I was through it by Wednesday afternoon. So here's what happened. Trump won, but it's really interesting. I don't think that this, so here are the numbers you really need to care about here. So one, this was obviously not a change election because we have, as of now, we have about 121 million people who have voted. There's this terrible data viz map that shows not voted, if that were a candidate, would have won in like 47 states, that a majority of Americans did not vote. So that's kind of shameful. But what's actually interesting here is 2 things. One, Donald Trump has basically held serve with what Mitt Romney did in terms of vote turnout. And he will probably, at the end of the vote counting, he will be ahead of that. There are 5 million votes separating Hillary Clinton in 2016 and Barack Obama in 2012. Forget about 2008. There was just no connection. She underperformed. And that's kind of where she lost the election, but I'll dig into it a little bit deeper. So you remember that map I showed you? That's the map on the left. And you know those states that call them the Rust Belt, kind of like the kind of loop here, right? The map on the right is a data visualization of increases, bursts of turnout higher than the previous election. So if you're a Democrat, thank you, Salt Lake City. That's it. Now, what's interesting here is that if you overlaid these maps, this explosion of rural turnout is exactly what happened here. That is the reason why Donald Trump won. And every one of those states, Wisconsin, Michigan, though they still haven't called it for some reason, Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, if you blew up Washington, D.C., Virginia would have gone red, Florida, all those states gone. Do you guys know what that area of the country is called? Just below the Rust Belt? It's called Appalachia. If you haven't read the book Hillbilly Elegy, run, don't walk, because it'll explain exactly why Hillary Clinton lost this election. There's this whole, and these are all rural voters. There's no cities. I mean, there's some cities in there, but this is cow pastures and ranch, and it's all rural, and that's where Donald Trump made his connection. That's where he made his bet. So Donald Trump is not a politician. He doesn't think politically. He does think politically. He doesn't sort of think in the status quo of politics, but he made a calculated guess. He said, you know what? I got to figure out how I'm going to get the most votes. Who am I going to piss off? Well, if you look at turnout, 12% black, 11% Hispanic, 4% Asian, 3%, I don't know what other means, but that's roughly a third of the electorate versus 2/3 of the electorate, which is white. So Donald Trump said, well, yeah, I'm going to go where the votes are. I'm going to go piss off non-white people because then I'm going to gin up the white people, and that's where all the votes are. There was no gender surge. This is astonishing to me. 12-point difference between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. First woman to be on a major major party nominee. Obama in 2008, 56-43. They used to joke about how Bill Clinton was our first black president. Maybe Obama was our first female president. So one of the things that I was scratching my head about on the day after the election was that how could this have been like a story of the economy when Hillary Clinton won among the poorest households? Median income is $50,000 roughly, so everyone below that. Hillary Clinton won 53-41 and 51-42, so obviously it could have been an economic argument, right? Wrong. So remember that R27 number I told you earlier about how white non-college was growing their, Republicans were growing their lead? Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton among whites with no degree, who comprised roughly a third of the entire electorate, by 40 points. 40. Even Obama kept it within 18 in 2008 when he had a message that resonated more with white voters, particularly those with no education. 40 points. It's a whitewash. It's a whitewash. You can't even begin to make up those votes among non-whites. And then in the end, she didn't win with white college grads. She didn't. So that cute little blip that we all made ourselves feel better about didn't happen. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but this does matter to you. I just spent a week in the UK where I was holding everyone's hands and telling them that a Trump presidency was actually good for the UK, and I kind of got those really funny looks, but in fact, it's true. Sadly, I don't know that I can tell that same story for this industry, because in reality, Donald Trump has taken both sides of nearly every issue, right? So the challenge for you guys is that he has taken a pretty strong stance on at least one of the issues you care a lot about, and one of the other issues you care about is just too freaking hard for anybody, much less Donald Trump, to understand. What will a Trump president? I found this slide. Forbes was thinking about this, has been thinking about this for a while. So, problem number one, Donald Trump vows to end the H-1 visa program. I'm assuming that's not a good thing for you guys. And he is actually, it's on his website, he actually is pretty vociferous about this. He actually thinks, look, we've got plenty, make America great again, we've got plenty of educated, unemployed people in the United States. You need to find your people there. That's a policy challenge. However, the good news is that actually Americans, thank you to Donald Trump, are actually more likely to believe that immigrants contribute something of value to our society today than they were really when he began his primary campaign back in January. So in theory, you do have public opinion on your side, that there is a lot of support, particularly for skilled workers. But generally speaking, like, we are not writ large an anti-immigrant or anti-foreign country, just, you know, the guy in the White House. Here's the other issue that I kind of thought was interesting, the issue on cyber. And I've done some work in this space in terms of public opinion, and I don't know that I've ever conducted research on an issue that is more vexing to voters, who simply can't understand why they can't have it all. Why can't we be safe, and why can't my stuff be secret? Like, they don't get that. And there's no reason to believe that Donald Trump is going to get it either. People are freaked out about terrorism. Freaked out. What is an issue of great concern to the United States? I mean, really, like climate change, you have to actually like jump off the cliff to get down to climate change. Cyber attacks from other countries is the second issue of greatest concern to American voters. That's just astounding to me. However, AARP did a survey on cybersecurity, and they had a lot of data in there, but the one that I thought was good and I think presented an opportunity for the industry is that just 1 in 4 actually recall seeing any information about how to protect themselves. Now, that might just be like a punch in the gut if you actually spend your days talking to your people about why how to make themselves better and safer, but there's clearly an audience here that is not hearing it or doesn't remember it. And I think when you're talking about credibility and favorability and how an industry stands out in terms of supporting things that people care about, there's clearly an opportunity there on cyber. And I'm going to stop there and hand it over to Tim.
Tim Storey, National Conference of State Legislatures. Thank you, everybody, for putting me on the panel. Let me do my favorite shtick about what has happened and what is going on in the states. I love talking about this stuff, maybe a little too much, so I hope you'll just ride along with me. It's only 15 minutes, and I got my timer going. I'll try to stick to that. Also, I know many of you are partners with NCSL and our foundation. I see a lot of great familiar faces. Google has been a terrific partner for our leaders work and many other things that we do. So big thank you to CompTIA for all the support that you guys do for NCSL as well. It's a great partnership, and we love working with most of you. And if you're not a partner with NCSL, I have a few of you in mind. Come talk to me afterwards in the handful of minutes that I have before I have to race off. Big year for elections in the states, but not a big change year. So I'm going to give you sort of two broad themes to take away about the states. The Republicans thought that they were going to get hit hard in the states this year. It was just the natural swing of the pendulum. It was time to come back to the Democrats. That did not happen, obviously, and I'll go into some detail about that. But relatively little change. Only 8 chambers have shifted control. Only 40 seats net gain for Republicans. That's relatively small. In fact, it's meager coattails. The average number of chambers that swing control in legislatures every 2 years is 12. So the fact that only 8 changed hands is small change. So relatively little change. So the big message for you and your industry is it's not going to change a whole lot. The big story, of course, is going to be how the states and the federal government work together moving forward. So there were 5,915 legislative seats up for election this time around, out of the 7,383 total legislative seats. How many of you guys, you work in the states? Is that right? Some of you, most of you, a fair number of you. So it's easy. It makes Washington seem easy because you got to chase down 7,383 of these birds, or even just the 50 governors. But there was a lot of, as usual, every 2 years, over 80% of the seats are on the ballot. And that was the case this year. No elections in the 4 odd-year states. And then you had 2 states with 4-year terms that sort of jump over 2016, Maryland and Alabama. So it was a big election year just generally. So that was what was up for grabs. And heading into the election, Republicans had 30 state legislatures, Democrats down to 12. And as you can see, pretty much everything has a saltwater coast except for Vermont and Illinois. So the Democrats have been sort of moved to the coast in many ways in terms of state legislatures. 7 divided, and Nebraska is nonpartisan. Anybody here from Nebraska? Any Nebraskans? That's always good, because now I can make fun of Nebraska. It's always good to know, like, which state is no one here from. I will not make fun of Nebraska, although I reserve the right to if I have to. Nebraska is technically nonpartisan. They run as nonpartisans for the legislature, but among friends here, there are more nonpartisan Republicans than there are nonpartisan Democrats in Nebraska. So we will sort of pretend, if you'll just kind of squint a little bit, you'll see that they are actually a red state. So this was not a high watermark in terms of the total number of legislatures for Republicans, but there were 67 Republican chambers going into this election, and that's the most in the history of the GOP. So Republicans are at their literal high water mark and control of state legislative chambers in the United States going into the election. They controlled 4,120 seats of the 7,383, not counting the 49 in Nebraska who are nonpartisan. It's also unicameral. They only have a Senate. So all 49 are nonpartisan senators. And so that's a little about 55% of all legislative seats. Again, not the highest point for the GOP. In fact, the highest point for Republicans in the states was after the 1920 election. Warren G. Harding. Most of you probably weren't even born in 1920, I'm going to guess. So nobody remembers the Harding years, the great Harding administration. That was the last high water mark for Republicans in terms of seats and chambers and states. So we are really at sort of a historic dominance of Republicans in the states. And now all that sort of pointed to, well, this pendulum is going to swing back to the Democrats. It's just the natural ebb and flow of things. And then as Jason was saying, terrific sort of setup about how most people sort of assumed that things were lining up for a Hillary Clinton presidency. And so Democrats were sort of optimistic. It did not turn out that way. This is what changed on election night less than a week ago. Boy, is that right? Today's Wednesday. So
Feels like 20 years
it
ago.
does. It's hard to figure out. I like Jason, it's been a busy week. So it's been an 8-day week. And so just over a week ago, boy, how the world has changed in so many ways, including in the states to some degree. These were the states that shifted power. I'm going to run through these very quickly. First was Kentucky, a state that nobody was hugely surprised about. Democrats had a 53-47 advantage in the state House. They still controlled the state Senate, Republicans controlled the state Senate. But after the election, Republicans had a huge sweep. Now, this was a place where Trump coattails mattered massively. By the way, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell campaigned for Kentucky Republicans. The governor made it his personal mission to switch the House in Kentucky from Democrat to Republican, and they were successful. Suffice it to say, Hillary Clinton was not popular in coal country, and that played out very well for Republicans down the ballot in Kentucky. They switched the House. They picked up 17 seats, far and away the biggest gain for either party, not counting New Hampshire. Anybody here from New Hampshire? Does everybody know that in the New Hampshire House there are 400 members of the New Hampshire House? 400 members. So, most people serve in the legislature at some point in their life in New Hampshire because it's sort of, I think it's part of the Constitution or something. It's like anyway, so setting aside New Hampshire because it skews all the data, Kentucky, biggest win, 17 seats for Republicans. The next one was Iowa, where the state Senate was 26-24 Democratic headed into the election. So, I'm sorry, it was 26-23-1 because one of the Republicans left the party because of Donald Trump. So he left the Senate GOP in Iowa because of Donald Trump, became independent. He is now in the minority because Republicans gained a number of seats in the Iowa Senate. Now they control, I want to say 28 or 26 total seats. Minnesota was the biggest surprise. The Minnesota Senate, Democrats had essentially a 7-seat lead in the Minnesota Senate. It's now 34-33 Republican. So just a 1-seat advantage in the Minnesota Senate. They have not chosen their leaders yet. The irony there was, of course, that the Senate Republican leader, David Hahn, who's really a good guy, actually lost his seat. So he would have been in line to be the Senate president because they gained the chamber. David will be moving on to greener pastures, I suppose. Democrats had a few bright spots. The first was New Mexico, where the House had gone to the Republicans just 2 years ago, has now gone back to the Democrats, I think 36-34 if memory serves. And then in Nevada, where both chambers actually flipped to the Democrats, the Assembly by a fairly huge, not huge, but a substantial margin. And then the Nevada Senate going in was 11 Republicans, 10 Democrats. It's now 11 Democrats, 9 Republicans, and 1 independent because one of the Republicans switched parties yesterday to independent and is going to caucus with the Democrats. Wow. So in the Nevada Senate, 11 to 9 to 1 is a huge majority. It has really gone back and forth a number of times. Only 21 members, the second smallest legislative chamber in the country. Washington State has gone from yellow to blue, if you're following closely in your PowerPoint up here. But that is an illusion. Do not believe the blue you see on the Washington. Anybody here from Washington? The Washington Senate, it has been 1-seat majority Republican for the last 2 years. It has switched parties, by the way, I think 4 of the last 5 election cycles. It's one of the most turbulent legislative chambers in the country. It's now on paper 1+1 Democratic majority, but Senator Tim Sheldon is a Democrat, is the only non-King County or Thurston County Democrat elected in the Senate. I think I'm right about that. So he caucuses with the Republicans and has for the last several years. So the Republicans will actually maintain control of the Washington Senate. So Tim Sheldon is a Dino, a Democrat in name only. I don't know if people use that. You hear Rhino a lot, but he is literally a Democrat in name only. He caucuses with Republicans. So they don't really control that. New York is an interesting case. Anybody here from New York? Any New York Senate people? So the New York Senate has been numerically controlled by Republicans. They have a caucus of 7 independent Democrats who caucus with the Republicans, so it's been a coalition. As of right now, there are 31 Democrats, 31 Republicans in the New York Senate, and 1 seat divided by 33 votes, with 9,000 left to be counted. So right now, Democrat John Brooks has the advantage over Senator Venditto, who's the Republican. So it could be 32 to 31 Democratic. However, our 7 independent Democratic caucus people are up for negotiations, shall we say. So the traditional Democrats are still hoping they could actually control through the numbers of Democrats, but it's likely you'll have a coalition control in the New York Senate. So it will be divided, I think, but still undecided. And then the Connecticut Senate finally went from Democratic to tied. They're going to have a coalition leadership. It's now 18 Democrats, 18 Republicans. So you've got a tied situation in Connecticut Senate. The Democratic lieutenant governor will break ties, but it's going to really be sort of a joint situation. And then everybody can see Delaware over here. Delaware is the most interesting situation. I don't know how much business you guys do in Delaware. But as of Election Day, this is a little bit complicated, so follow with me at home. On paper, there are 11 Democrats and 10 Republicans in the Delaware Senate. But one of the Democratic senators was elected lieutenant governor. Now, she will have to resign her Senate seat to become lieutenant governor on January the 14th. The legislature is sworn in on January the 7th. So from January the 7th to January 14th, it'll be 11 Ds to 10 Rs. On January the 14th, it'll be 10 Ds, 10 Rs, and they'll have to call a special election for within 45 days. That will be a super duper intense special election for control of the Delaware Senate. The Republicans are very optimistic they can win in this seat, so Delaware will be sort of undecided, even though as of now it's 11D to 10R. All right, moving quickly here. So overall, the number of total changes is 8. Delaware could be added to this. You could sort of say 9, but really the Washington Senate didn't change, and the New York Senate is probably not going to change. It's going to wind up being coalition anyways. And this is sort of 8 with the Connecticut Senate going to tied is, kind of modest, if not very small change. This was in 2010. You see that teeter-totter where the Republicans swept the world? This was in 2011 where 2014 where Republicans swept the world. So by comparison, this was not a big change election. Where does that leave us? 32 Republican states, not counting Nebraska. So 32 GOP legislatures is the most Republican-controlled legislatures in the history of the United States, okay? So can I frame that again? In the history of the United States, there have never been more Republican legislatures. So hopefully you know a lot of legislators who are Republicans in the world because they are running the show right now. Only 3 split chambers, the fewest since the 1940s. Only 13 Democratic legislatures. Overall chambers, you got 66 in the GOP column, not their all-time high, 1 that's undecided New York, 1 that's tied Connecticut, and the rest are the Democratic controlled. This is the overall timeline. So I want to sort of show you. So Republicans now wind up at like 56.4% of all 7,383 legislative seats. But when you look at this line, back in the 1974 post-Watergate election, Democrats controlled the world. They held almost 70% of legislative seats and controlled controlled 38 states at the time. So even though Republicans have the highest control, they could go higher. Democrats have gone higher, but there's a structural check on that did not exist in the 1970s we can talk about in a little bit. Were there coattails? Yes, very modest, which is pretty typical. The green line are the seats gained by the president party running. So typically the party winning the White House does win legislative seats, but only about 40-45 for the GOP and Trump. Regionally, very small change. Some Republican gains, about 40 seats in the South, 35 seats in the Midwest, but no, pretty much even in the East and slight gain in the West for Democrats. Another big story here. This was in 1992. Some of you probably weren't even born in 1992, which is really scary to me because that seems like it wasn't that long ago. But in 1992, every legislature in the South was controlled by the Democrats. Heading into this election, every legislature in the South except for Kentucky was controlled by the Republicans, but now with the change of the Kentucky House, every legislature in the South is Republican. So that is a big shift in a relatively short amount of time. Republicans control 64% of all seats in the South. So if you're working in southern states, it is a GOP world from top to bottom, pretty much. A handful of governors, such as in Louisiana. This was the party going into, governor's party going in. There were only 12 governor's races this time. No incumbents lost except for maybe, who knows, North Carolina, where the incumbent Pat McCrory is losing by about 4,800 seats. They're going to tally all the provisionals, I think, by Friday. There's still about, I just looked this up, about 60,000 votes left to be counted, something like that. Are you from North Carolina? My beloved home state. So are you from North Carolina? All right. Where are you from? Raleigh? I'm from Nashville. Oh my gosh, I thought you looked familiar.
Y'all are neighbors.
Bob. That is exactly right. It does not look like McCrory's going to win. So it looks like Roy Cooper, the AG, is going to win, and Democrats will pick this up. What changed in the governor's races? 3 of them actually shifted from Democrat to Republican: Missouri, Vermont, and New Hampshire. I love that you're taking pictures of this, but these slides are on the website, and I will email them to you as well. Bonus, and that won't cost you a cent. So North Carolina is still undecided, but really not a lot of change on the governor's side. And you're welcome to take pictures. I didn't mean to keep you from doing that, but I'm just saying I'll give them to you right at the thing. And then the governor's party after the election: 33 Republican governors, 14 Democratic governors. 33 ties the most Republican governors in American history. Okay, so you sort of sense this theme about controlling the states from a partisan perspective. And what does that mean for state governments? Headed in, it was 22 Republican, 8 Democrat, 19 divided. But after this election, 24 Republican, let's back up. Heading in 22, coming out 24. Not huge change, frankly. And North Carolina is probably going to be divided when you do this. And New York is probably going to be divided because of the coalition in the Senate. So really, it's in terms of total control of states, not massive change as the bottom line. But look at the Democrats. Keep in mind that Washington is not really Democratic, so they're down to 5. And then keep in mind that Delaware has a decent chance of becoming split, so that puts them down to 4. So you could have 4 states where the Democrats have control of government, which is really sort of mind-boggling. It would be the lowest point for Democrats in the history of the United States. Anybody know what that means? It means I'm out of time. So I'm almost done. If you'll grant me like 2 more minutes. A lot of talk about how Obama has decimated the state base of the Democratic Party. There's certainly some truth to that. Democrats have lost 816 legislative seats, but it's not the worst ever. I mean, Eisenhower lost 1,000 seats. Herbert Hoover lost 1,000 seats for the Republicans. Warren Harding, best Republican president ever elected, but then in his midterm, the worst midterm in the history. He was only a 4-year president, and he lost 1,100 seats. Eisenhower, of course, had an 8-year term. And then Donald Trump, he's starting off with 40, so he's got a green line to start with. And this is sort of the good news for Democrats slide. There's another election in 2 years. And guess what happens to the party in the White House, the incumbent in the White House? They typically, 27 out of 29 midterm elections since 1900, the party in the White House loses ground in the states. And that has been modulated somewhat. It used to be much bigger in the early part of the last century. It's a little bit less of late, probably because of redistricting, and we can talk about that if you'd like in the Q&A. So let me just wrap up with a few thoughts. I think most Americans were sort of glad this election was over. By the way, these are all real bumper stickers that I saw on real cars. I live in Denver. I'm in one of those infamous flyover states, and we're okay with that. You guys can fly over us all you want. Although we do have recreational marijuana, just so you know. So these are all bumper stickers I saw on cars in Denver. There were no Hillary signs. People were not excited about voting for Hillary Clinton in Denver County, which, by the way, is a strong Democratic county, and a state that went for Hillary Clinton in the election. So people are glad it's over. A few final notes. If you're a Democrat, in 2 years, the election will come back around. And in the Hawaii State Senate, it is now 25 Democrats and 0 Republicans. If you really want to be in a Democratic state, you can move to Hawaii, where Democrats control every seat in the Hawaii State Senate and most of the seats in the Hawaii State House. Poor Sam Slom, by the way. Does anybody know Sam, the Republican leader in the... And I was going to run through some of the leaders that lost. You know, Mike Gronstal, the Senate Majority Leader in Iowa, lost his race. Michael Sanchez, the Senate Leader in New Mexico, lost. Patricia Blevins, the Democratic Senate leader in Delaware, lost her race. So a handful of top leaders were knocked off. And Sam Slom, who was the Republican Party chair of the Hawaii Senate, he was the Republican Majority Chair, the Republican Caucus Whip, the Republican everything, because he was the only Republican in the Hawaii Senate. He lost. Redistricting is around the corner. I think you're going to start seeing more national attention on these legislative races. I think the other big challenge is going to be for Republicans. Maybe you saw this slide, but some of their majorities are so big. It's the biggest majority ever in the Wisconsin Assembly. It's the biggest majority of Republicans in the Pennsylvania House since 1956. So you're going to see a lot of, I don't want to say infighting, but this is the Speaker of the House in Utah once told me that keeping her caucus in line was like keeping rabbits on a flatbed, and I think that's sort of what this stands for. There's going to be a lot of infighting on some of these Republican caucuses because they're so big. I mean, anybody here from Kansas, there are essentially 4 Republican parties in the Kansas House. There are 4 factions in the New Hampshire House now running for Speaker within this sizable Republican majority. I'm going to wrap it up there. I really appreciate you guys paying attention to the state stuff. I think it's pretty darn important. I think the states have been in the driver's seat on policy now for years. I think that's going to continue to be the case at some level because I'm not convinced that you're going to see harmony in Washington in terms of policy making. So I think this is still going to be where the leadership on policy is going to take place, for better or worse. I mean, I think in some cases some of the key issues you're interested in, that may not always be the best thing. So if you would like these slides, I would put the link up there, but it's super hard to find on our website. It's kind of ridiculous. If you want these slides, my slides, not Jason's, they're on our website, ntsl.org, and then we had a meeting on Monday, and they're on the resources page for that meeting. So you find the state vote meeting, and then you can, the slides are linked off of that state vote meeting on the NCSL website. Or I will gladly email them to you in PowerPoint format, and you can just steal them. That's okay by me.
Yeah, and if you're okay, we'll probably link or
we can put
post in our blog on CompTIA.org.
That's perfect.
Okay.
That's perfect.
Great.
Well,
That would be
thanks for
fantastic.
letting me go a little time, and we'll
Yeah.
do some Q&A.
Yeah.